Chapters 15 and 16 of Tom Swift and His War Tank. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Tom Swift and His War Tank. Chapter 15, Across Country. Ned Newton sighted his machine gun. Tom had showed him how to work it, and indeed the young bank clerk had had some practice with a weapon like this, erected on a stationary tripod. But this was the first time Ned had attempted to fire from the tank while it was moving, and he found it an altogether different matter. "Say, it sure is hard to aim where you want to," he shouted across to Tom, it being necessary, even in the conning tower, where this one gun was mounted, to speak loudly to make oneself heard above the hum, the roar and rattle of the machinery in the interior of Tank A, and below and to the rear of the two young men. "Well, that's part of the game," Tom answered. "I'm sending her along over as smooth ground as I can pick out, but it's rough at best. Still, this is nothing to what you'll get in Flanders." "If I get there!" exclaimed Ned grimly. "Well, here goes!" And once more he tried to aim the machine gun at the middle of the brick wall of the ruined factory. A moment later there was a rattle and a roar as the quick-firing mechanism started, and a veritable hail of bullets swept out at the masonry. Tom and Ned could see where they struck, knocking off bits of stone, brick, and cement. "Sweep it, Ned, sweep it!" cried Tom. "Imagine a crowd of Germans are charging out at you, and sweep 'em out of the way!" Obeying this command, the young man moved the barrel of the machine gun from side to side and slightly up and down. The effect was at once apparent. The walls showed spatter marks of the bullets over a wider area, and had a body of Teutons been before the factory, or even inside it, many of them would have been accounted for, since there were several holes in the wall through which Ned's bullets sped, carrying potential death with them. "That's better!" shouted Tom. "That'll do the business! Now I'm going to open her up, Ned." "Open her up!" cried the young bank clerk as he ceased firing. "Yes, crack the wall of that factory as I would a nut. Watch me take it on high. That is, if the old tank doesn't go back on me." "You mean you're going to try to ride right over that building, Tom?" "I mean I'm going to try. If Tank A does as I expect her to, she'll butt into that wall, crush it down by force and weight, and then waddle over the ruins. Watch!" Tom sent some signals to the motor room. At once there was noticed an increase in the vibrations of the ponderous machine. "They're giving her more speed," said Tom, "and I guess we'll need it." Straight for the old factory went Tank A. In spite of its ruined condition, some of the walls were still firm, and seemed to offer a big obstacle to even so powerful an engine of war as this monstrous tank. "Get ready now, Ned," Tom advised, "and when I crack her open for you, cut loose with the machine gun again. This gun is supposed to fire straight ahead and a little to either side. There are other guns at left and right, amidships, as I might say, and there's also one in the stern to take care of any attack from that direction. The men in charge of them will fire at the same time you do, and it will be as near like a real attack as we can make it, with the exception of not being fired back at. And I wouldn't mind if such were the case, for I don't believe anything outside of heavy artillery will have any effect on this tank." Tank A was now almost at her maximum speed as she approached closer to the deserted factory. Ned and Tom, in the conning tower, saw the largest of the remaining walls looming before them. Straight at it rushed the ponderous machine, and the next moment there came a shock which almost threw Ned away from his gun and back against the steel wall behind him. "Hold fast!" cried Tom. "Here we go! Fire, Ned, fire!" There was a crash as the blunt nose of the great war tank hit the wall and crumpled it up. A great hole was made in the masonry, and what was not crushed under the caterpillar belts of the tank fell in a shower of bricks, stone, and cement on top of the machine. Like a great hailstorm the broken masonry pelted the steel sides and top of the tank. But she felt them no more than does an alligator the attacks of a colony of ants. Right on through the dust the tank crushed her way. Added to the noise of the falling walls was that of the machine guns, which were barking away like a kennel of angry hounds eager to be unleashed at the quarry. Ned kept his gun going until the heat of it warned him to stop and let the barrel cool, or he knew he would jam some of the mechanism. The other guns were firing too, and the bullets sent up little spatter points of dust as they hit. "Great jumping hop toads!" yelled Ned above the riot of racket, outside and inside. "Feel her go, Tom!" "Yes, she's just chewing it up all right!" cried the young inventor, his eyes shining with delight. The tank had actually burst her way through the solid wall of the old factory, permission to complete the demolition of which Tom had secured from the owners. Then the great machine kept right on. She fairly walked over the piles of masonry, dipped down into what had been a basement, now partially filled with debris, and kept on toward another wall. "I'm going through that, too!" cried Tom. And he did, knocking it down and sending his tank over the piled-up ruins, while the machine guns barked, coughed, and spluttered, as Ned and the others inside the tank held back the firing levers. Right through the opposite wall, as through the one she had already demolished, the tank careened on her way, to emerge, rather battered and dust-covered, on the other side of what was left of the factory. And there was not much of it left. Tank A had well nigh completed its demolition. "If there'd been a nest of Germans in there," said Tom as he brought the machine to a stop in a field beyond the factory, "they'd have gotten out in a hurry." "Or taken the consequences," added Ned as he wiped the sweat from his powder-blackened and oil-smeared face. "I certainly kept my gun going." "Yes, and so did the others," reported one of the mechanics as he emerged from the cubby-hole where the great motors had now ceased their hum and roar. "How did she stand it?" asked Tom. "All right inside," answered the man. "I was wondering how she looks from the outside." "Oh, it would take more than that to damage her," said Tom with pardonable pride. "That was pie for her. Solid concrete, which she may have to chew up on the western front, may present another kind of problem, but I guess she'll be able to master that too. Well, let's have a look." He and Ned, with some of the crew and gunners, went outside the tank. She was a sorry-looking sight, very different from the trim appearance she had presented when she first left the shop. Bricks, bits of stone, and piles of broken cement in chunks and dust lay thick on her broad back. But no real damage had been done, as a hasty examination showed. "Well, are you satisfied, Tom?" asked his chum. "Yes, and more," was the answer. "Of course, this wasn't the hardest test to which she could have been submitted, but it will do to show what punishment she can stand. Being shot at from big guns is another matter. I'll have to wait until she gets to Flanders to see what effect that will have. But I know the kind of armor skin she has, and that doesn't worry me. There's one thing more I want to do while I have her out now." "What's that?" asked Ned. "Take her for a long trip cross-country, and then shove her through some extra heavy barbed wire. I'm certain she'll chew that up, but I want to see it actually done. So now, if you want to come along, Ned, we'll go cross-country." "I'm with you." "Get inside, then. We'll let the dust and masonry blow and rattle off as we go along." The tank started off across the fields, which stretched for many miles on either side of the deserted factory, when suddenly Ned, who was again at his post in the observation tower, called, "Look, Tom!" "What at?" "That corner of the factory which is still standing. Look at those men coming out and running away." Ned pointed, and his chum, leaning over from the steering wheel and controls, gave a start of surprise as he saw three figures clambering down over the broken debris and making their way out of what had once been a doorway. "Did they come out of the factory, Ned?" "They surely did, and unless I miss my guess they were in it, or around it, when we went through like a fellow carrying the football over the line for a touchdown." "In there when the tank broke open things?" "I think so. I didn't see them before, but they certainly ran out as we started away." "This has got to be looked into," decided Tom. "Come on, Ned. It may be more of that spy business." Tom Swift stopped the tank and prepared to get out. End of Chapter 15. Chapter 16. The Old Barn. "There's no use chasing after 'em, Tom," observed Ned as the two chums stood side by side outside the tank and gazed after the three men running off across the fields as fast as they could go. "They've got too much of a start on us." "I guess you're right, Ned," agreed Tom. "And we can't very well pursue them in the tank. She goes a bit faster than anything of her build, but a running man is more than a match for her in a short distance. If I had the Hawk here, there'd be a different story to tell." "Well, seeing that you haven't," replied Ned, "suppose we let them go, which we'll have to, whether we want to or not, and see where they were hiding and if they left any traces behind." "That's a good idea," returned Tom. The place whence the men had emerged was a portion of the old factory farthest removed from the walls the tank had crunched its way through. Consequently, that part was the least damaged. Tom and Ned came to what seemed to have been the office of the building when the factory was in operation. A door, from which most of the glass had been broken, hung on one hinge, and pushing this open the two chums found themselves in a room that bore evidences of having been the bookkeeper's department. There were the remains of cabinet files and a broken letterpress, while in one corner stood a safe. "Maybe they were cracking that," said Ned. "They were wasting their time if they were," observed Tom, "for the combination is broken. Anyone can open it," and he demonstrated this by swinging back one of the heavy doors. A quantity of papers fell out, or what had been papers, for they were now torn and the edges charred as if by some recent fire. "They were burning these!" cried Ned. "You can smell the smoke yet. They came here to destroy some papers, and we surprised them." "I believe you're right," agreed Tom. "The ashes are still warm," and he tested them with his hand. "They wanted to destroy something, and when they found we were here, they clapped the blazing stuff into the safe, thinking it would burn there. But the closing of the doors cut off the supply of air, and the fire smoldered and went out. It burned enough so that it didn't leave us very much in the way of evidence, though," went on Tom, ruefully, as he poked among the charred scraps. "Maybe you can read some of 'em," suggested Ned. "Part of the writing is in German," Tom said, as he looked over the mass. "I don't believe it would be worth while to try it. Still, I can save it. Here, I'll sweep the stuff into a box, and if we get a chance, we can try to patch it together." And finding a broken box in what had been the factory office, the young inventor managed to get into it the charred remains of the papers. A further search failed to reveal anything that would be useful in the way of evidence to determine what object the three men could have had in hiding in the ruins, and Tom and Ned returned to the tank. "What do you think about them, Tom?" asked Ned as they were about to start off once more for the cross-country test. "Well, it seems like a silly thing to say, as if I imagined my tank was all there was in this part of the country to make trouble, but I believe those men had some connection with Simpson and with that spy Schwen." "I agree with you," exclaimed Ned, "and I think if we could get head or tail of those burned papers, we'd find out that there was some correspondence there between the man I saw up the tree and the workman you had arrested." "Too bad we weren't a bit quicker," commented Tom. "They must have been in the factory when we charged it. Probably came there to be in seclusion while they talked, plotted, and planned. They must have been afraid to go out when the tank was walking through the walls." "I guess that's it," agreed Ned. "Did you recognize any of the men, Tom?" "No, I didn't see 'em as soon as you did, and when they were running they had their backs towards me. Was Simpson one?" "I can't be sure. If one was, I guess he'll think we're keeping pretty closely after him, and he may give this part of the country a wide berth." "I hope he does," returned Tom. "Do you know, Ned, I have an idea that these fellows, Schwen, Simpson, and those back of them, including Blakeson, are trying to get hold of the secret of my tank for the Germans." "I shouldn't be surprised, but you've got it finished now, haven't you? They can't get your patents away from you." "No, it isn't that," said Tom. There are certain secrets about the mechanism of the tank, the way I've increased the speed and power, the use of the spanners, and things like that, which would be useful for the Germans to know. I wouldn't want them to find out these secrets, and they could do that if they were in the tank a while, or had her in their possession." "They couldn't do that, Tom. Get possession of her, could they?" "There's no telling. I'm going to be doubly on the watch. That fellow Blakeson is in the pay of the plotters, I believe. He has a big machine shop, and he might try to duplicate my tank if he knew how she was made inside." "I see. That's why he was inquiring about a good machinist, I suppose. Though he'd be mightily surprised when he learns it was you he was talking to the time your hawk met with the little mishap." "Yes, I guess maybe he will be a bit startled," agreed Tom. "But I haven't seen him around lately, and maybe he has given up." "Don't trust to that," warned Ned. The tank was now progressing easily over fields, hesitating not at small or big ditches, flow going uphill, now down, across a stretch of country thinly settled, where even fences were a rarity. When they came to wooden ones, Tom had the workmen get out and take down the bars. Of course, the tank could have crushed them like toothpicks, but Tom was mindful of the rights of farmers, and a broken fence might mean strayed cows, or the letting of cattle into a field of grain or corn, to the damage of both cattle and fodder. "There's a barbed wire fence," observed Ned, as he pointed to one off some distance across the field. "Why don't you try demolishing that?" "Oh, it would be too easy. Besides, I don't want the bother of putting it up again. When I make the barbed wire test, I want some set up on heavy posts and with many strands, as it is in Flanders. Even that won't stop the tank, but I'm anxious to see how she breaks up the wire in supports, just what sort of a breach she makes. But I have a different plan in mind now. I'm going to try to find a wooden building we can charge, as we did the masonry factory. I want to smash up a barn, and I'll have to pick out an old one for choice, for in these war days we must conserve all we can, even old barns." "What's the idea of using a barn, Tom?" "Well, I want to test the tank under all sorts of conditions, the same conditions she'll meet with on the Western Front. We've proved that a brick and stone factory is no obstacle." "Then how could a flimsy wooden barn be?" "Well, that's just it. I don't think that it will, but it may be that a barn, when smashed, will get tangled up in the endless steel belts and clog them so they'll jam. That's the reason I want to try a wooden structure next." "Do you know where to find one?" "Yes, about a mile from here is one I've had my eyes on ever since I began constructing the tank. I don't know who owns it, but it's such a ramshackle affair that he can't object to having it knocked into kindling wood for him. If he does holler, I can pay him for the damage done. So now for a barn, Ned, unless you're getting tired and want to go back." "I should say not. Speaking of barns, I'm with you till the cows come home. Want any more machine gun work?" "No, I guess not. This barn isn't particularly isolated, and the shooting might scare horses and cattle. We can smash things up without the guns." The tank was going on smoothly when suddenly there was a lurch to one side, and the great machine quickly swung about in a circle. "Hello!" cried Ned. "What's up now? Some new stunt?" "Must be something wrong," answered the young inventor. "One of the belts has stopped working. That's why we're going in a circle." He shut off the power and hastened down to the motor room. There he found his men gathered about one of the machines. "What's wrong?" asked Tom quickly. "Just a little accident," replied the head machinist. "One of the boys dropped his monkey wrench and it smashed some spark plugs. That caused a short circuit and the left-hand motor went out of business. We'll have her fixed in a jiffy." Tom looked relieved, and the machinist was as good as his word. In a few minutes the tank was moving forward again. It crossed out to the road, to the great astonishment of some farmers, and the fright of their horses, and then Tom once more swung her into the fields. "There's the old barn I spoke of," he remarked to Ned. It's almost as bad a ruin as the factory was, but we'll have a go at it." "Going to smash it?" asked Ned. "I'm going right through it!" Tom cried. End of chapter.